Well, good morning to everyone in the Americas. Good afternoon to our friends in Europe and Africa. And good evening, well, late evening actually, to everyone in Asia and Oceania. In fact, if you are dialed in the middle of the night here, I really admire your dedication. Today, we are here to talk about the evolution of NativeScript. Now, what does this really mean? Well, we are coming up on the third anniversary of NativeScript's first public release. And since that time, the framework itself, along with all the tooling options and plugins and community support, have really allowed us to quite literally evolve into a preeminent solution for cross-platform native app development. So today, we're going to talk about this evolution, and specifically, what are some tools and techniques you can use to get the most out of NativeScript. Now, as a quick introduction, my name is Rob Lauer, and I'll be your MC today. I help manage the mobility wing of our developer relations team here at Progress. Actually, my main job is to just stay out of the way of our excellent stable of developer advocates that you'll hear from today, and more from them in just a minute. In terms of webinar logistics, we are working in an environment with all too many network variables from our end to yours. In case we have any interruptions today in our video or audio, please let us know via the Q&A window. Otherwise, worst case scenario, this entire webinar is being recorded and will be available on the NativeScript YouTube channel. So stay tuned there as we'll have the video posted within a week or so. Now, how on earth are you going to hear about this webinar recording being up on YouTube? Well, the easy way to find out is to follow us on Twitter at NativeScript. In terms of our social media presence, you can certainly find us on Facebook and Reddit, but we are probably most consistent and most focused on Twitter. So follow us there for the very latest in news, announcements, retweets of cat videos, all that kind of good stuff. And today, if you have any questions at all about NativeScript during the webinar, please ask them on Twitter. We will be watching the Ask NativeScript hashtag as you see it on the screen here. So tag your questions accordingly. We have a crew ready to answer your questions, so fire away. Now, once the webinar is over, where should you go with your questions and support? Well, I'm pleased to announce the NativeScript Slack channel is up to over 4,500 engaged developers. This is fantastic, and you can join the conversation as well today by using this URL. So just access tinyurl.com/NativeScript/Slack to get your invite. And Slack is great, of course, for that real-time conversation and support, but sometimes those conversations can get lost in the shuffle. That's why earlier this year we booted up a community support forum based on Discourse. Available at forum.nativescript.org, this is really the resource for questions you have regarding the NativeScript framework. So please join us on the forum, ask your questions, and help a fellow developer out by answering some. Which brings me to my first announcement of the day, and that is a new forum rewards program. We are extremely grateful for all the community members out there who give their hard time to help out other developers on the forum. So we want to give back a little and reward the hardest working members of the community. How exactly will we do this? Well, we're going to be sending out gifts of generous gift cards every month to the top performers on the forum. Likewise, we will send out additional premium gifts every quarter to the top performers over the previous 3 months. Now you should be asking, what does a quote-unquote top performer mean? Well, it means those individuals who received the most likes on their forum answers. This program starts November 1st, so everyone will start at 0 and have every opportunity to win. And we will have additional details in an article on the NativeScript blog coming next week, so stay tuned there. And of course, like anything of this nature, gifts and rules are subject to change, but we will keep you notified of any changes via the forum and blog. And finally, as an example of some of the great quarterly prizes we may be shipping out, these fantastic new premium NativeScript jackets are a top quality item. This is something that we won't be handing out at any conferences. So as you can see, we have socks too, so we may throw a pair of those in as well. So remember, this program starts November 1st at forum.nativescript.org. Now, if you are brand new to NativeScript, welcome. NativeScript is the way to create native cross-platform mobile apps that are ready for the App Store. You'll learn right away that NativeScript apps are built with JavaScript, CSS, and an easy-to-learn XML-based markup language. And yes, the apps are truly native, with JavaScript powering native UI and providing access to native device features. And before you say to yourself, hey, this sounds like Cordova or PhoneGap, absolutely not. NativeScript apps are not constrained by web views at all. This is truly native UI, running with native performance, but cross-platform and built with JavaScript. And yes, that does mean just one code base for both iOS and Android. If you haven't gone through them already, we have 2 great getting started tutorials you can access at docs.nativescript.org. One tutorial is for plain vanilla JavaScript development, and the other focuses on TypeScript and Angular. We do provide first-class support for Angular. We'll also be talking about some new tools in this webinar to help you get started with NativeScript, but more on those in a bit. I do want to take a moment to thank all of you who have been with us from the beginning. The growth of NativeScript has been tremendous this past year, and we quite literally wouldn't be where we are today without all of you. If you're the kind of person who wants to see who else is working with NativeScript, well, I've got some logos for you. We are actively working with large companies like SAP, Southwest Airlines, Verizon, Blue Cross Blue Shield, really to bring NativeScript to the enterprise and prove its value. But make no mistake, we want NativeScript to be for all developers. But we especially want NativeScript to help the enterprise developer tasked with creating these high-quality apps connecting to critical business data. And in case you missed the news, Progress recently acquired Kinvey, a leading enterprise mobile backend provider. The Kinvey addition helps to round out the enterprise app development story here, providing really tight integration with NativeScript and full-stack productivity. And I wasn't kidding that Kinvey is a leader. Forrester ranked Kinvey #1 in both mobile development platforms and enterprise health cloud rankings, beating out some big industry titans. So if you're curious to learn more, just head to kinvey.com/nativescript. All right, let's talk updates and get a quick taste of how NativeScript has been evolving. Today in our webinar, we'll be covering the following topics. Performance. Performance has been a common thread in all of our releases this year as we aim to provide the most performant native JavaScript framework. We have dramatically improved app startup times for iOS and Android. And as you can see here in our flagship tutorial demo app, we've shaved an amazing amount of time off the startup, but we're not done yet. More on this later in the hour. We've also dramatically improved our Chrome DevTools integrations. Yes, did you know that you can debug a NativeScript app using your familiar browser-based developer tooling? We also recently announced that our premium NativeScript UI component offering is now completely free. This means you can access the rich charting, autocomplete, dataform, calendar components today without any license fees whatsoever. And I'm sure we all know that iOS 11 and Android Oreo just came out, and one of NativeScript's huge differentiators is the day zero support we have for new APIs from Apple and Google. We do have support today for these new OSs, and we'll continue to improve on the support in coming releases. As a wonderful example of this day zero support is our support for the new augmented reality SDKs for iOS and Android. We'll have a preview of a cross-platform AR plugin coming soon, and we'll be talking about this more today. Now we've introduced some fantastic new tooling options as well. I will try not to steal Jen's thunder here, but we are very excited about these new offerings and how each one of them will make you a better and more efficient mobile app developer. And Angular, as mentioned earlier, we continue to provide true first-class support for Angular in NativeScript. And I mention this because when we talk about Angular, we also want to talk about Angular web apps. Naturally, when we talk about Angular web apps, we want to talk a little about opportunities to share existing code between a website and native mobile apps. So, a natural way to do this is to look at the code you may be writing today with an Angular style of MVC or MV star pattern of development. If you're creating a web app, you're generating your model, view, and controller. Likewise, if you're also creating a native iOS and native Android variant using the same concepts, you're writing a lot of distinct components. Well, using NativeScript and our code sharing strategies, you can literally share the same code between your web app and mobile apps, reducing complexity and reducing your time to market. And Sebastian is here to talk all about this. Alright, so let's get on with it. I'm pleased now to introduce all of our speakers today. First up will be Sebastian Vitalik speaking on Angular and code sharing strategies. Next up will be Jen Looper covering new tooling options and updates that are sure to improve your experience with NativeScript. TJ Van Tol will be here catching us all up on performance and the latest updates to the framework. And I'm super pleased to have a special guest. Eddie Verbruggen will be here to talk all things plugins. And if you don't know Eddie yet, you should, as he is a NativeScript plugin mastermind. Now, make sure you're following all these folks on Twitter, as these are the real NativeScript experts. So before I hand things over, I did want to remind you all to use the Ask NativeScript hashtag on Twitter during the webinar for any questions at all. And with that, Sebastian, please take it away.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Sebastian Vitalec and I'm a developer advocate at Progress. You can follow me on Twitter at Sebavita. So let's start with code sharing between web and mobile. The whole idea is that we want to be able to share as much of the code as possible between Android, iOS, and web. And one of the ways of doing that is we could use a monorepo type of project where we could have all the elements that are shareable, like pipes and services. You could even create a theme using Sass variables, but then have two separate CSS files, one for web styling and then one for NativeScript styling. And then for each of our components, the classes are pretty much shareable, but then we would have two different types of HTMLs, one for web and one for NativeScript. And then similarly for modules, we could reuse all the components, we could reuse the navigation, but we probably would have two different types of ng modules. And then having all that project, then we need some sort of a build process that will be able to take the shareable elements and then the platform specific. So for example, if we looked at the web project, we'd want to take the common ones, the red ones, and then as a result get a web application. Or vice versa, for NativeScript, we could then exclude the web specific ones, but use the NativeScript files and then get that going. So the pros and cons really are, the good part is that you could use Angular CLI. This approach is pretty good for complex projects, and everything is in one place. So it's actually quite easy to manage, between your web and your mobile application. The bad thing about this approach is that it's a bit of an overkill for small projects, and the fact that you need an additional build process, it kind of can be a little bit daunting at first, which is basically even the ugly part of like, how do I even begin? And where do I get a project that would have the build process out of the box? So the answer for that is there's a bunch of monorepo starter kits, or we call them project seeds. One from Team Maestro called Angular Native Seed, or the other one from Nathan Walker, which is called Advanced Angular Seed. So if you clone any of those, those will automatically come with the whole build process out of the box, and you could use that to build your own projects. So I'm going to focus today on the Team Maestro seed. So the way it works, it has like its own build system. So if you want to build a web application, it's business as usual. You just call ng-serve, and then that calls Angular CLI, and you get a web project as a result. If you want to build a NativeScript application, then this specific monorepo has its own build process. So you run npm run iOS or npm run Android, and then this will execute in two steps. The first one is we will run through a gulp process, which will take the source code and then extract the shared items and as well the NativeScript specific one, and you will recreate a NativeScript type project. And then as a second step, this will run through a NativeScript CLI to build a mobile application for you. So for example, if you look at a component or how you would actually structure your code, let's say you would have a component, name component, which for the TypeScript class, it would be name.component.ts. But for the HTML, we use a naming convention. So you can see in blue, we actually have name.component.tns.html, which specify, hey, this is a native specific file. And in red, we have name.component.html without TNS, which basically means this is a web specific file. And if we wanted to add a Sass file, all we have to do is just follow the same concept. So again, in blue, we have .tns.scss to specify a NativeScript specific file, while in red, we have just .scss. And obviously, creating all these files can be time consuming. So you're probably wondering whether there's any tools that could help you with that. So the answer is yes. I created this little extension for NativeScript CLI, which is called NativeScript Angular CLI, and you can just install it by calling TNS extension install NativeScript Angular CLI, and then as a result you get a bunch of additional commands. So one of them is TNS generate shared component, which will generate a component in a structure that already has all the .tns files where you need them, or for short you could just use tnsgsc name. And then if you want to generate a shareable module, then you just call tns generate shared module name, and then again that will generate a module with a component inside that already has all the .tns web and both NativeScript specific files. So for the demo part, I'm just going to show you very quickly how to build a little imperial to metric converter, and then show you how all of that works in action. So here we've got a brand new Angular native seed project. So I'm going to just open terminal and use Angular CLI to generate a new service called calculator. And then once that's done, I can go into the calculator and then add additional functions like kilogram to pound and pound to kilogram that we will need. Additionally, we'll need a shareable module. So I'm going to use the TNS extension to generate shared module, and I'm going to call it calculator. So basically, I will be able to lazy load our module. So see this module sits in brand new folder here. So we have one module for web, one for NativeScript, and there is where our calculator component sits over here. So just over here, first thing we have to do is add our calculator service to the provider so that it will be accessible to us. That generated the code nicely for us, and then additionally do the same thing for the NativeScript ng module. So let's add it to providers. And then that's pretty much ready to go. And pretty much at this point, I could even build the application by just running ngserve, and then this will build a web application for us. And then to build a mobile application, I just have to go into the NativeScript folder, because that's basically where all the shareable elements will sit. And then I just need to run npm run iOS, and then this will basically perform the build for me, and then we'll be able to see exactly the same application between the two. So let's have a look at our web application. So let me just quickly refresh that. So we have our home and an about page, and our mobile app also has a home and an about page, pretty much displaying the same content. So we already are on a good way to do the code sharing. The thing is that the rebuilding of the NativeScript project this way, it can be time consuming every time. So even if it's like half a minute or a minute, you don't want to rerun the whole npm run command. So what we could do instead is just npm run live sync, which will basically do just the gold part of copying the shareable elements to the NativeScript folder. And then separately, I can go to the NativeScript folder and then just straight use tns run iOS, which will use NativeScript's live sync. And then by doing that, we can just make continuous changes to our project, and then constantly just have the whole app being refreshed for us. So let's try to implement some of the bits. So we have our calculator module and we want to display it. So we need to add it to the navigation. So in this project is actually the home root that has all the navigation. So I can add a lazy loaded path to load calculator. And then this basically will go to the app calculator module, and in here we want to load a calculator module in a lazy loaded fashion. And then also what we have to do is we need to add our calculator to the navigation bar. So I can just copy this quickly, which sits in app component.ts. So the title will be calculator page, and we want to navigate to calculator path, and then that pretty much should build the application for us. So let's have a look how this looks on our web application. So we have our calculator page with calculator title, and in our mobile application we have a new element just saying calculator title. So now all we have to do is just implement those. So let's go into the calculator component and then implement the necessary bits. So first I'm gonna go to the calculator component itself, and then we're gonna add a couple of attributes. So we have like an input for the user to enter the value, and the result where we're gonna display the value itself. I'm gonna use dependency injection to load our calculator service, which see it's over here nicely, and then finally I'm gonna expose some of the functions. So like we have kilograms to pounds and pounds to kilograms. So pretty much like this is completely platform agnostic. So now we just have to implement the individual elements. So for NativeScript, I'm just gonna add a stack layout with a text field to gather the input. Then we have a label to display the result, and a couple of buttons to just call kg to p or p to kg for us. And then for our web application, we basically have an input which binds to input itself. We use an h1 tag to display the result, and again a button that calls kg to p or p to kg. So if we now have a look at our application, we can see that if I enter 100 in pounds, that will be 220, or 100 pounds in kilograms, that's 45.45. And then in our NativeScript application, I can again go to the calculator page, enter 100, convert it to kilograms or convert it to pounds, and we get pretty much the same results. I know this is a pretty simple example, but it pretty much explains the idea of like how this repo works, or how like the .tns extension kind of like allows us to separate web from NativeScript files. So let me go back quickly to the presentation. So in terms of resources, if you want to learn more about it, I wrote quite a lengthy article on code sharing between web and mobile with Angular and NativeScript. You can check it out on our NativeScript blogs. I gave also a talk at NativeScript Dev Day on that very topic. If you're interested in using the Angular CLI for NativeScript, you can get it from that GitHub repo. Or if you want to see another example project, you can check me out at basically Seba Vita Pet Bros on my GitHub. And that's pretty much me for today. So thanks for listening. And next up is Jen Looper, who's gonna talk to you about some of the cool tooling stuff we've been creating with NativeScript. So over to you, Jen. Bye.
Thanks, Sebastian. Hi, everyone. My name's Jen. I'm a developer advocate here at Progress. You can find me on Twitter at Jen Looper, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the really cool tooling that we've introduced for NativeScript developers. I'm going to start with the playground. I'm going to talk about the plugins marketplace, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about Sidekick, which I think a lot of you are already starting to use these tools, and we're always interested in your feedback, so please let us know what you think. So let's talk a little bit about the getting started experience with NativeScript. To get started, you're going to have to install your native SDKs, then you're going to install your NativeScript CLI, create a new NativeScript project, then you're going to configure your emulators, and then you're going to have to deploy to device. That's sort of the standard workflow for a native development. Well, with Playground, we're offering you a different alternative. The new NativeScript Playground, which you're going to find at play.nativescript.org, is a really cool way to write snippets and code samples in the browser and test them directly on your device using a couple of companion apps. Let's take a look at how it's done. So to start tinkering with NativeScript code, I can visit play.nativescript.org and just create a sample app. And I can go ahead and get a QR code, and it'll scan in the companion apps that are installed on my phone. So then I can start making some changes, and you're going to see the speed with which this thing can live sync to your device. So I just make quick changes, and I can even make changes in the action bar, change the title of the app, this sort of thing. It's a great way to test to do little experiments, to try different styles, and see how far you can customize your code within the playground. You can also use the little drag and drop capability here to drag buttons, for example, a little button with nice angular syntax, right onto your screen, and it'll appear in your companion app right away. So you can add a little alert in the TypeScript and that'll come through as well. All you have to do is save and watch your companion app refresh. It's a really terrific way to just try and test. You can also click share at the top and share your playground with other people. That's really, really helpful. You can just copy it and then people will be able to open it with the QR code in their companion app. And you can also, if you want to share it in a different way, you can download a zip of the code that you just scaffolded. Now, a new thing that you can start tinkering with on the playground is our implementation of NativeScript plus Vue.js. I'm actually really excited about this community initiative that we're starting to see more and more people getting interested in. So it's the same system. You create using a template, a sample of our Vue implementation, and then you can start making changes right within the playground and visualizing them in the companion apps. So here you can make little changes in this nice Vue code here, which you can tell it's Vue because it's got the little kebab cases and some different types of data bindings, but it does look pretty familiar if you're a standard NativeScript developer. Make little changes in the label here, and you can also tinker with things like the CSS and sort of design your app on the fly here. Now, if you're interested in learning more about NativeScript Playground, take a look at this great article that Sebastian wrote on the NativeScript blogs about the playground. You can also take a look at how people are using the playground to give us new NativeScript snacks. So visit nativescriptsnacks.com and you can take a look at the code snippets, and some of these are actually built in Playground. So you can run these snippets right on your phone. And another thing people are doing is using snippets to explain problems that they might be having trouble with right on the forum. So it's a great way to share code. A picture's worth 1,000 words. May as well just do a little playground snippet, and then that will just ease everyone's comprehension of the issue that you're having. So that's a little demo of the very cool NativeScript Playground, which you can find at play.nativescript.org. So now let's turn our attention to the NativeScript Marketplace. So this is a website that will allow you to sift through all of the plugins that you're going to find if you start digging on NPM. So if you search for NativeScript, you're going to find 642 packages tagged with the word NativeScript. What is the deal with that? How can we sift through these plugins? How can you figure out what to use? The problem with plugins is that it's really hard to know whether they work on iOS and Android. Do they work at all? Does it work with Angular? Is it going to work in the future? And how do I use it, the implementation of it? So we have developed a tool just for you. The NativeScript Marketplace, which you'll find at market.nativescript.org, offers the concept of verified plugins. And these plugins are unit tested. They support iOS and Android, they are documented, and they support both vanilla NativeScript and Angular. So you can go ahead and be assured of the quality of these plugins because they are marked with the stamp of being verified. So the NativeScript Marketplace is currently laid out like this. You can go ahead and search for plugins, and you can find the verified plugins right at the top. Click on a plugin like the verified Kinvey NativeScript SDK plugin, scroll through, and you can see all the interesting details that you're going to need to implement this plugin's functionality within your mobile app. I want to show you what's coming next for the marketplace because there's some pretty exciting things coming down the road. One is this new triage of verified and updated plugins. Another is the new author pages. So this will show you a little bit of information about the author behind the plugin, sort of like who's behind the scenes. And then we have this cool new feature of templates. So we are going to be offering some internally built and some community built templates on the NativeScript Marketplace. So I look forward to these enhancements, and keep an eye on market.nativescript.org. Now the last tool I want to talk about is NativeScript Sidekick. Now a lot of people have been using Sidekick already and have been really excited by its potential. It's one of these tools that is sort of magical and just helps you smooth out the rough edges that kind of plague the native developer. Now Sidekick is not a standalone IDE in and of itself, but it is a great companion as you're running your app using the CLI. So you can go ahead and use it to create a new app using templates that we offer. You can use it to manage an existing app. You can organize assets like the icons and all of the extra screens you need for delivery to the stores, manage your plugin integrations. You can build locally or in the cloud. extremely useful if you happen to not have the emulators that you need installed locally. And then you can go ahead and scaffold new code and publish to stores. So let's take a look at how all of that works. Sidekick is a desktop application that you can download right off of nativescript.org/nativescript-sidekick. So go ahead and find the button that says download and Sidekick and choose which platform you'd like to install it on. I already have mine installed, so I'm going to go ahead and fire it up. So here you're prompted to go ahead and create a new app or open an old app that you've already developed. So here I'm going to go ahead and give it a name, and then I'm offered a couple of menus. I'm offered several different ways that I can scaffold out my app. I can have it as a blank app, an app with a drawer, or tabs. I kind of like the tabs, so I'm probably going to stick with that. And then you're offered on the left the type of project that you want to have scaffolded for you. So NativeScript plus JavaScript, NativeScript plus TypeScript, or NativeScript plus Angular and TypeScript, which is what I'm going to go ahead and choose. So I'm going to create my app, and it's going to go ahead and scaffold it for me on my local computer, which is extremely helpful. So once your app is scaffolded out, you can take a look at a couple of options that are presented to you by Sidekick. The app settings on the left will show you how to manage your application version, version code, and you can take a look at the assets that you have available for your app. This is really helpful because you might have forgotten one of these icons or one of these screens that you need, and this will show you what's missing. I've found this very, very helpful. Also, this will give you an idea of the plugins that you have installed and the plugins that are available. And here we are back to the marketplace. You can search for the Fab button, for example, and go ahead and install that. I really like the way that this makes your workflow just that much simpler. It's sort of a one-stop shop for all the little bits and pieces that you need to make your app awesome. So here we have installed the floating action button, and we can also see the version so we can keep track of those sort of things as well. So that's just really great. Now, another cool thing that you can do is scaffold bits and pieces from right within Sidekick. So this is really nice. If you need, for example, a login page to be added to your app, you can go ahead and it will scaffold you out the code. You can view the files and you can see that the login folder has been created right for you with the routing, the component, and all the modules and all the bits that an Angular app is going to ask for. So that is just a huge time saver. I love the kind of scaffolded code, so helpful. That's why everybody loves the Angular CLI, because of the scaffolding. So another cool thing that Sidekick helps you do is run your apps on device. So I've already fired up an Android emulator, and I'm going to click that I want a build type of a local build, and it's going to go ahead and build my app that I just scaffolded for this Android emulator. And the first time this does take a little bit of time, but it'll eventually start live syncing very nicely. So here we have that tabbed app that I have created, and you can see how nicely it looks on this Android emulator. Now, if I would go ahead and do another build and run this on device with the debugger running, you are going to be able to leverage the Chrome dev tools that will pop right up. And this is an extremely, extremely helpful integration because it has this great debugging capability. Here comes the Chrome DevTools. And you can take a look at the Elements tab and see your app right in action. So I could make changes here just like you would on a web page actually, but you are actually working on a native app. It's actually pretty amazing. And on Android, I encourage you to give this a try. Now, one more super great thing that Sidekick helps you do is actually deliver your app to the App Store. This is just a miracle in my opinion, because this is almost the worst thing in app development, is that final stretch from the completion of your app to delivery to the store, especially for iOS. So here Sidekick offers you a nice menu to get your provisioning profiles and your certificates all loaded up and ready to roll. And you can do a local build, get it ready for delivery to Google Play, for example. Now, I've already posted in my key store, but I'm certainly not going to give you my password right now. So you'll have to take my word for it that this will help smooth your way right into the app stores. We've seen how Sidekick can help you create a completely new app from scratch and get everything organized within Sidekick for that app. But what if you already have been working on an app? Well, this was my situation. I started working on a Vue plus NativeScript app I call Clean Weather. It's based on a design that I found on Behance. So I decided to go ahead and import this into Sidekick and have it help me organize all the assets that I needed. So here's clean weather, and I went ahead and started adding bits and pieces that I need for iOS. For example, I'm going to need that the device families iPhone and iPad be saved. So I did that, and then I went ahead and took a look at the assets that I had. And Sidekick actually found that I was missing a couple of pieces. So obviously I still have some work to do to get my splash screens organized and to also handle some of these missing icons. So using Sidekick in tandem with an existing app that you've already been working on allows you to click on Terminal and go ahead and continue your usual development flow by firing up your emulator using the CLI and getting all of the debugging that you need right in your emulator here. So here I have clean weather loading up, and you can see that all of the bits and pieces for the screen are okay. It's actually a beautiful day in Boston. So then I would go ahead and start working on my within Visual Studio Code and go ahead and complete the app. So just to let you know that this is a Vue plus NativeScript app. The code is on GitHub, and in about 163 lines you can have a very nice looking weather app all set up for you. You can download NativeScript Sidekick right off of nativescript.org. Here's the URL, and I wish you the best of luck as you experiment with the new tooling that we're offering all for free for our beloved NativeScript community. So I'm going to pass the mic over to TJ, who's going to continue with the evolution of NativeScript.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen. And thanks to all of you out there that joined us today. I'm going to be talking about two things. First, I'll be discussing what's new in NativeScript 3.3. the upcoming version of the NativeScript framework. And second, I'm going to cover performance, as there are a lot of performance-related features that we've shipped really in the last handful of NativeScript releases, including 3.3. So I wanted to take a few minutes to go over these features to help make sure your apps are optimized. Let's start with NativeScript 3.3. First of all, the release itself is tentatively scheduled for next week, the week of the 23rd. Now, if you do want to test out some of the features we're talking about a little bit early, you can always use the next builds, essentially our daily builds that we publish to NPM. And if you're interested in that, head to the NativeScript docs, head to specifically the /releases/running-latest page for details on exactly how to do that. Now, for the release itself, there are a few features that we're super excited about, including Elements tab support in the Chrome DevTools for iOS apps. It's something I'm super excited about. We've got some bug fixes for both Android Oreo and also iOS 11, and a few performance-related features that we're going to discuss in detail momentarily. So the first of these features is support for using the Elements tab when you're using the Chrome DevTools on iOS. Now in NativeScript 3.2, we ship the ability to use the Elements tab on Android, and we've gotten some great feedback on that, and we really hope that's something that you've been trying out. With this release, you can additionally use that Elements tab on iOS so that you have the ability to use it on both platforms. Let's take a look at how it works. What you'll want to do is head to your terminal and run tns debug iOS and pass the -- Chrome flag to tell the CLI that you want to launch the Chrome developer tools. This is going to take about a minute to find your devices, to actually build and deploy your apps, and to kick things up on the DevTools. When it does, you'll see a URL pop up here, this Chrome DevTools one here. You want to paste that into your Chrome browser. And when you do, you'll see the Chrome DevTools here in the Elements tab, pretty much exactly like you would if you were debugging a web app. This is pretty awesome for just straight up visually seeing a representation of your app here. And you can also make changes as well. So for example, if I wanted to update this text here, I could totally do that. You can add new attributes. Let's say this apple's got to be way bigger. Overall, it's pretty cool. So if you haven't tried using the Chrome DevTools either on Android or iOS, you should really check it out and experiment with what you can do with this new feature. Along with NativeScript 3.3, we're also shipping a few bug fixes for both Android Oreo and iOS 11. This includes a bug fix for the iOS 11 logging issue that some of you that are already developing for iOS 11 have probably already noticed. So make sure you upgrade to 3.3 next week to take advantage of these new patches. The last thing I'll note before we get into performance is there's a new release of the free NativeScript UI components that's tentatively coming out next week as well. NativeScript UI 3.2 is mostly a bug fix and stability release, but there's a really cool new feature for a day view if you are using the calendar control. So it allows you to schedule and view events on an individual day basis. Make sure to follow the NativeScript blog for more information and details of this feature and exactly how it works. So a handful of cool features there, and a few more when we move on to the topic of performance. Now, as you probably know, performance has really been a major focus of ours over the last handful of releases. Between our work with Webpack and our Angular optimization works and things like Android snapshot builds, we've really shipped a lot of performance-related features over the last handful of months. So what I want to do is sort of take a step back, as this list can be kind of overwhelming, and just give you a brief demonstration of how to best implement these features in an actual app. So with that in mind, I'm going to switch over to the NativeScript grocery sample over here. The grocery sample isn't the world's most complicated app, but it's complicated enough to show the value that these recent performance optimizations can make. Now, the first thing you'll want to do with profiling any NativeScript app is to enable the NativeScript profiling tooling that shipped with the 3.1 release. To do that, you'll want to open up your app's app/package.json file, so make sure you're grabbing the one within the app folder. And you'll want to add a new key value pair of profiling and timeline. This tells NativeScript to really just enable a whole bunch of benchmarks when running your app. So for example, if you just run this app with TNS Run Android, you'll see a whole bunch of things like this. Now, of course, this data isn't exactly the easiest thing to read. So what you'll want to do is npm install globally a tool called Timeline View. Timeline View is just a little tool that you can pipe the data from TNS Run Android into. So TNS Run Android, and then pipe the data into Timeline View, which is just going to give us a little more human readable way of looking at this data. So it's again going to build this app. I still see the data on the terminal, but what I can do is when this is all done, I can hit Control-C, and my terminal is then going to give me a link to a little report here. And if I click this, I see the following chart. Now again, admittedly, this still really isn't the world's easiest to view page, but there are a few quick things that I'm going to note. First, you've got a pretty easy to read time up here that represents really just how long the startup process took for your application. This gives you a good benchmark number that you can use to gauge how effective any future optimizations are. The next thing to notice is if you look at this chunk up here is just how many require and load calls are happening during this phase of the startup process. Now this is happening because by default, NativeScript really just does a whole lot of file I/O to resolve all those require and import calls that you make and that really you need to make to build a real-world mobile app. Now the best way to reduce that file I/O and to save this cost that's going on at the beginning of the loading process is to implement the first of our optimizations, and that is Webpack. So if you head back to the terminal, we'll clear this out. If you haven't already, you'll want to install the NativeScript Webpack plugin. After this installs, you'll have to run npm install again just to make sure all of the dependencies from this plugin are in place. And one thing this plugin does is give you a number of scripts. If I go back to the root package JSON file, there's a number of new scripts for running your apps and run it through the Webpack bundling process, which is this bit right here. So if I go back to my terminal, I can run that with npm run, and I'm going to start this up on Android. So start-android-bundle. And I can again pipe the results of this to the timeline view tool so that I can see if I run my app through Webpack, what sort of difference is this going to make? How is it going to compare to the situation that we have right now? Now, Webpack's going to take a little bit longer than the previous build because it's actually got to go through the build process and sort of concatenate down these files. Now, the reason Webpack works is because essentially at a really high level, what it's doing is it's taking all those many files that you're using for building a NativeScript app and essentially concatenating them down into two really big files. And as you'll see in a second, when we look at the updated timeline view, is it's going to cut out a whole bunch of this processing that's going on when your app starts up. And there we go. And I'm going to Control-C to stop that. And we'll look at the updated report. So you can see that Webpack alone took the startup time down from about 4.5 seconds down to about 2.5. And the big thing to note is you'll see this giant chunk of requires and loads here, this sort of pyramid of doom, has been reduced to just a handful, just to bring in the handful of files that Webpack reduces your application down to. So to take a step back and review sort of where we're at the moment, the first thing you need to know about optimizing your apps is learning how to use this profiling tooling to enable this key in your app package.json file install the timeline view, and to be able to view these charts. The second was just enabling Webpack in your application, which is going to reduce a lot of that file I/O and boost your startup time fairly considerably. The next is to use a few flags. So if I go back here and I'm going to run this exact same start Android bundle command, but this time I'm going to pass 2 flags. The --uglify flag does 2 things. The first is it's going to reduce your application size. Essentially it's going to compress and minify your JavaScript code. The second, though, is Uglify is also smart enough to do a little bit of tree shaking. It's smart enough to remove dead code or code that is not used within your app. Less code means less code for NativeScript to parse at runtime, so --uglify will directly lead to a little bit of a reduction in that startup time. The second flag is --snapshot, and this activates a feature that we shipped in NativeScript 3.2 called Android Heap Snapshots. And I'm just going to go ahead and kick this off at the moment to give it a chance to run while we talk about exactly what's happening. Heap snapshots are a feature of V8, which is the JavaScript virtual machine that NativeScript uses under the hood on Android. When you use a heap snapshot, essentially what you're doing is instead of NativeScript having to parse your JavaScript code at runtime, NativeScript is able to feed that code to V8 during really the build process. That's what's happening in here in the terminal, which is going to remove a chunk of the time that you see in these graphs here. Now, there are 2 things you should know. Heap snapshots are a feature of V8, so it's something that you can only use with NativeScript on Android builds. And the tool that creates the snapshot is currently something that's only available on Mac and Linux machines. So it's not something that you can run if you are using Windows for development at the moment. Although we're hoping to make this feature available in Sidekick in the future. So that's done. So we can again look at our timeline and see the difference. You can see that our time right at the beginning here was reduced fairly drastically, the time where we're actually initializing V8 and starting up our app. And really, I mean, we're down to now 2.38 seconds startup time on a Nexus 6P with just really a minimal amount of effort. So at this point, just to back up, we learned how to use the NativeScript profiling tooling. We enabled Webpack. We used the --uglify flag, and we used the --snapshot flag. The last thing we'll cover is some new things that we have coming with NativeScript 3.3. We've been working on not only allowing you to store your JavaScript code in a heap snapshot, but also doing a little bit of ahead of time CSS parsing. Now, I don't have that quite ready for a demo today, but keep a lookout for that on the NativeScript blog when 3.3 comes out. The last feature we're shipping is related to this Mark Reachable Objects line that you see here. Now, Mark Reachable Objects is a V8 feature that is just related to how garbage collection works in the NativeScript Android runtime. And as you can see, it takes up a fairly considerable amount of time during the startup process. So we're experimenting with removing this step altogether, as it is unnecessary for the vast majority of applications. If you do want to experiment with this and activate it in your own applications, what you need to do is head back to your app/package.json file, and you need to add a new Android object and set the marking mode to none. This turns off that Mark Reachable Objects process, and as such, you should see much faster startup times. So if I run through and just run really the exact same thing, just with Mark Reachable Objects turned off, we'll run through the build again, which takes about a minute. And if I Control-C and look at my graph, you can see that Mark Reachable Objects is gone, and my app is now on Android on this Nexus 6P that I have over here, starting up in less than 2 seconds. Now, at the moment, the flag you see here is still experimental, so we'd love your help testing this out. We've been using this flag in our own apps, and we know some of you in the NativeScript community have as well. But if you do end up trying this out, and if you do run into any issues, please let us know about it. At the moment, we're considering making this flag the default in the future because of the performance gains that you can get. So let's wrap things up. When it comes to performance in NativeScript apps, the first thing you need to know is learn how to use the profiling tooling. This can be as simple as adding a key value pair to your app/package.json file, installing the timeline view tool, and just knowing how to read the startup times to see the difference that these optimizations can make. The second thing is make sure when you do these benchmarks that you do them on physical devices. iOS simulators and Android virtual devices are super convenient, but they're not going to give you real world numbers that your users are actually going to hit on their devices, which is why I've been running these tests on a Nexus 6P. When you've got your benchmarking setup in place, the first thing you'll want to do is install Webpack. And you'll want to use Webpack and run through that full build process for any release build, really any build that you're sending out to your users in the app stores. As part of those builds, you'll want to use the --uglify and --snapshot flags. And finally, try out the new mark reachable objects flag. Try turning that off and just see how it goes. Now, of course, there's a lot more we could talk about with performance. You could dive a whole lot deeper. If you found any of this interesting and you want to know more, I highly recommend checking out Stana Mira's talk from NativeScript Developer Day. She talks about all of this and more, including how to dive into individual Webpack chunks, how to get the most amount of code into your heap snapshot as possible to really, really optimize the startup times of your applications. It's pretty awesome, so you should check it out. You can head to bit.ly/dev-day-performance to see it for yourself. And with that, that's all I have for you today. I hope you're as excited about NativeScript 3.3 as I am, but I'm also excited to hear from our next speaker. We've got NativeScript plugin wizard Eddie Verbruggen. So Eddie, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, TJ. Awesome stuff as always. Speaking of the devil, this here is TJ at the NativeScript Dev Day in New York, where he's showing the NativeScript AR plugin really to power a feature in the Nadidas app to try before you buy. So how big is this jumbo NativeScript stress cube really? You can just try it with the AR plugin. So I found that a really creative way to use the plugin, and I wanted to show you how to do that yourself. So what he's doing here is detecting a plane, and you see these grids being drawn on the floor. And then when a plane is found, you can tap it anywhere and add the jumbo stress cube, which is really just a box with a texture. So let's see what's happening here. I've already created a NativeScript app with the ng template because I like Angular. I added the AR plugin and I ran iOS. And on the left here you see my iPad running the app. And to see if LiveSync is still working, we need to change the title. Yeah, everything's fine. So let's go to the plugin repo. Scroll down a bit and there you see instructions to how to use it with Angular or plain XML. And if you want to add any UI plugin to your app, you also need to register the UI namespace. So let's open up the app module. In case you're lazily loading your modules and you want this AR experience in one specific module, you'll register the element in that module, but this is not lazily loaded, so I can just throw it in the global app module. And then next up is, well, add the AR tag to the HTML file you want to show the AR experience in. So I'm just going to replace the stack layout by this one. And there's a few properties over here I'd like to explain to you a little. And that's also documented here. So there's the properties like the debug level, this one. By default it's none, but you want to see it doing something. So I set it to feature points and you see all those yellow dots. I also wanted to detect planes, show me some statistics, and I have a specific plane material I want to use. And if the plane is tapped, I want something. I want an event in my component as well, and I also want it if AR is loaded, so immediately when the scene is loaded. And where you wire these properties and methods is obviously in your component that's associated with this HTML file. And that's this one. And I've already added the AR loaded and plane tapped placeholders, but I forgot about adding material, and that's here. Your material can be an asset like TJ's Tron grid that was drawn on the floor, but in this case I just wanted to be some color. I'm going to make it blue today, tweak the transparency a bit and see what happens. So here we go, here's AR running in my office, which is a bit of a mess, sorry. and you see those yellow dots detecting a plane, and there's a plane, and if I tap the plane, nothing happens because we didn't add any code to the plane tapped yet. So let's put this on my desk for a second, and let's see what we need to do here. So to make it a bit more interesting, I'm going to add an actual 3D model to the scene, and there's a few websites where you can get a hold of these things. You need to search for DAE files, and for instance this website 3d.com has a nice collection, and I saw this truck over here. So I downloaded this truck and I then added it to my project over here, just in your app resources, iOS, and this name is arbitrary in this one as well, but you need to remember this path so you can use that later on. So once AR is loaded, I can immediately show the truck. I don't need to wait for a plane to be tapped. So in these events we get back the AR object, and this is really the API for the plugin. In this case I want to add a model, and this model has a name, and I'm going to copy paste a little to not waste your time too much. This was the path to the model. I want it to be at X, that is to your left or right, so 0 is at the center, Y is at the vertical axis, so 0 means the origin of your camera, it's not the floor, that's what plane detection is for, and Z is, well, negative Z is in front of you. And I will also want to have it scaled down a bit because this truck model is huge. So let's live sync this, and immediately you'll see the truck over there. Let's look at it from a few different angles. Here you can see all those nice Lego bricks going on. It's a pretty cool model. And let's see, yeah, here's the bottom. Oh, there's Lego at the bottom as well. I didn't notice that before. Pretty cool. Yeah, but it's a bit static, right? But just something you can do. You can add entire scenes of houses or whatnot to your AR experience and wander in the house, etc. But for now, let's remove the AR loaded event, so the truck is gone, and add the box that TJ added. And this is this one has quite some properties. These are all the properties you can pass to it at the moment, and obviously there will be more in the future. But the first thing you need to do is the position. So when the plane is tapped, you want this box to appear at the exact spot where that plane was tapped, and you can do that by passing in the position that you get back from the event. And then another important thing is telling AR which dimensions the box needs to have. And dimensions is a nice beast because you can pass it either a number or an AR dimensions object. But I want it to be square, so I might as well just do one number here. And I also wanted to have a bit of a rounded corners, and this is relative to the dimension, so I need it to be small, otherwise I might as well just add a sphere, right? Also give it some mass, so I'm able to let those things fall. And materials is also an interesting property. You need to pass an array, or you don't need it, it's optional, but otherwise it will be white. So you can pass it an array, and it can be an array of strings. That's what TJ had, because it was just one texture, the NativeScript PNG logo, and you need to just reference it like we did with a model. So just reference a PNG instead here. Or you can pass a color or a material object, which is a bit more complex. You can pass diffusion and translucency and whatnot to it, but that's just too complex for now. So let's pass in an array of color. If I would pass in just one color, then it would be, well, there's 6 sides, all 6 sides would have the same color. But if I pass in 2, you'll have 3 sides of the same color, and in this case I want 3 different colors. And also when I long press it, I want to remove the box. So on long press you get back the box, and the box has a remove event. Oh, sorry, remove event you can use. So let's see what we have built. Live sync. The truck is gone, so that's good. And now let's detect the plane. By the way, if you have a hard time detecting planes, you can add the NativeScript flashlight plugin. That's also by TJ, by the way. And it will really brighten up the scene, so it's way easier to detect them. But if I'm now going to tap the top of the plane, and there's your box, and another one, and another one. But it doesn't really look cool. Oh, there's the yellow, by the way. So there's two sides of red, yellow, and blue. Doesn't look too cool because they're just, well, pretty static. But we can change that a bit by dropping them on the scene. And, well, let's do it like this. arcs.position.y. Drop it from a meter high, right? So this is the last bit, and then I'll let you off the hook. Get on with your lives instead of this virtual life over here. So, okay, let's detect the plane. And oh, it's a nice big plane. So here we're going to drop a box instead. So they're dropping from about a meter high. And let's drop a lot of those babies. And there you can see them falling off the plane. Whee! There they go. And let's stack a few. Okay, here in the front there's a nicely stacked one. Let me point at it. So I'm going to remove that one by using the long press method. Oh, yeah, there it went. It's sometimes a bit hard to do because there's a lot of blocks in the way, right? So that's the interaction you can do with AR at the moment. And so you have boxes, you have spheres, you have tubes, you have models, and there's also text you can add to the scene. You can add it immediately when the scene is loaded. You can have some interaction with it. And obviously in the future we want to add more events like rotation, swiping objects, and also of course Android support, but Android requires you to run Oreo, and also at the moment you need to sideload an APK, which I don't see real users do anyway. So thank you for watching me augment some reality. Please go to the repo here, browse through the documentation, open pull requests or issues. I'm really curious to learn what you want to do with it, what you have done with it. And yeah, with that, back to you, Rob.
Awesome. Thank you, Eddie. And thanks for being our special guest today. You know, as I'm watching Eddie's segment on AR, it really helps to gel this concept of how NativeScript can be incredibly effective for all of us as a cross-platform abstractions on top of some pretty complicated APIs. And thanks, of course, to our other speakers as well. I think we all learned a thing or two today. Just a reminder, if you have any last questions, get them in now on Twitter by using the Ask NativeScript hashtag. But, of course, we're not done yet. I have one more announcement to make, and that is regarding NativeScript Sidekick and Visual Studio. We heard Jen earlier talking about Sidekick proper, but Sidekick will become more than just a standalone program. In fact, I'd like to show you a quick demo of using the new NativeScript Sidekick extension with Visual Studio 2015 or 2017. So let's do that now. Okay, let me pop over to Visual Studio here, and with the NativeScript Sidekick extension installed in Visual Studio 2017, I can go to File, New Project, and you'll see I'm presented with a list of NativeScript templates, and I can even narrow those templates down by project type, so Angular, JavaScript, or TypeScript. In my case, I'm just going to create, how about a drawer navigation project? And this prompt is just asking me to update to TypeScript 2.3. Alright, with my project loaded inside Visual Studio, I can navigate to the app directory, and let's take a look in the home directory and pop open a couple files here. those of you who are Visual Studio users will be comfortable with the IntelliSense options available and the code editing capabilities. Nothing I need to show off there. But I will go into my project menu here and take a look at my application properties. Now, this is where I'm able to set the app name, a description, the all-important app identifier as well. I can even manage my code signing certificates and provisioning profiles for both Android and iOS here. And I can pop over to the Dependencies tab, and I can look and see which plugins I have installed. I can upgrade them to new versions. This is a preview version of the extension, as I mentioned before, so I can search the NPM registry in this case, but in a future version that will actually search the plugins marketplace that we have. So I can discover and install new plugins right from within this interface. Now, more importantly, the best feature of the NativeScript Sidekick extension here is the ability to create cloud and local builds. So I have the ability to create cloud builds for both Android and iOS, as well as create local builds for Android if I have those local dependencies installed. So this truly does mean if I want to build for iOS, I don't need a Mac, I can do it in the cloud using this Sidekick extension. Alright, now we haven't spoken much today about the new darling framework on the block, Vue, but rest assured our community-backed Vue integration is marching towards a 1.0 release. In fact, if you want to try using Vue with NativeScript today, an easy way to get started is by initializing a new app with the Vue template and taking a look at the code. Vue is a nice, simple, and clean framework, so I think you'll enjoy it. Stay tuned as we'll be providing a lot more Vue-related content in the future. And now I did want to take a moment to remind you to check out some great resources out in the community. First and foremost is nativescripting.com. This is a great repository of video-based learning resources for you to peruse. There's also a new book from Nathan Walker and Nathaniel Anderson on using NativeScript with Angular. It's available now on Packet, and it's called NativeScript for Angular Mobile Development. And another new book from Mike and Nick Branstein called, appropriately enough, the NativeScript book. Now this book is actually free and available at nativescript.org/book in both PDF and EPUB formats. Now the NativeScript book focuses more on vanilla JavaScript, whereas the previous book is focused on Angular, so you certainly can't go wrong grabbing both of them. And like any good meeting, we need to end with some really quality action items. Now today on the tooling front, we covered a lot, so I'd really love for you to check out NativeScript Sidekick. And if you want to play around with NativeScript in a browser, you need to head on over to play.nativescript.org. Likewise, if you're looking for a verified plugin, find your way to market.nativescript.org. And whenever you have questions, you know you can find us on the forum at forum.nativescript.org. Remember, the new forum rewards program is starting on November 1st, so get ready to lend a hand there. And finally, you can always find a friend on our Slack channel. Alright, that's all for us, but we'll be back before you know it. We have some great things up our collective sleeves for our tooling offerings and the framework itself, so stay tuned. Thanks to everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day.